oh, wait a minute, we could do things differently and it'd be more effective and it'd be more impactful and people would get more out of it. And so that started my wheels turning. So I'm always ready with my notebook as well, but
Yes,
you
yes,
just
that's
never
awesome.
know.
Yes.
All right.
Okay, ready to jump.
Okay.
Okay, well, hello, Jess. It is absolutely wonderful to have you here. It's been a long time coming, I feel. We are just starting the new year as we're talking through, as we're recording this episode. So yeah, I'd love to hear more about your break and all the things you're sort of amped up for this beginning of the new year.
Oh, great. Well, my break was pretty uneventful, although my children are now older. So I had my daughter came home to visit, which is always delightful. And I live in Phoenix, Arizona. So we were able to get out and do some golfing, which I know is not something a lot of the country or a lot of the world is able to do at this point in time. So we love this part of the year in Arizona because we can be outside the most.
Okay, well, that's yeah, definitely no golfing for me. Just sledding.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but I am from South Africa, so I used to do like beaches and so very
Hmm.
different Christmases these days. Okay, and so let's tell us a little bit about you, where you are right now before we sort of go back in time and visit your journey.
Oh, sure. So where I am in my career right now?
Mhm.
Yeah, well, I went out on my own about little almost about 2 years ago now and started my own company. So prior to that, my last role was as a vice president of learning at an employee benefits company called WEX, their benefits division. And so I'm out on my own and I'm doing my best to work with companies who are mainly small but quickly growing to create learning strategy, learning blueprints for them. And I also do speaking and workshops around this concept of how learning and development, we need to change. We need to be able to work more closely with the business, in concert with the business, and as true partners, not as support staff, but as partners. So I do a lot of talking about that. That's where I'm at mainly in my career.
Okay, yes, and we definitely sing the same tune because that
Hmm.
is why, yeah, I follow all of your posts and love them all because I totally agree with you. All right, now let's travel back in time throughout your career. It's just some of the best stories come out, and I'm always fascinated to learn more about where you started. So tell me about the very first job that ever gave you a paycheck.
Oh, the very first. Well, as a kid, I'm the oldest of 10 children. So first of all, um, not all of them were at home all the time. My parents adopted seven of them from all different places. But what that meant is there was always someone younger around. And so my very first job was babysitting. And the people in the neighborhood liked to call our house because they could get one of three teenage girls who could potentially come over and babysit who were always around younger kids. And so that was it. Then the first one outside of that, where it was an outside entity hiring me, I don't even know what it would be called now these days. It's called a locker room supervisor, I think. I made 385 an hour. And what I did was I sat in the locker room at the local community pool and kids would come in for their open swim in the girls' locker room. Kids would come in for open swim and they had to pay 50 cents or whatever to swim. And so I had to collect the money and then I had to clean up the locker room in between sessions. So I used the squeegee quite a bit to squeegee water around and chat with little kids.
Wow, I didn't even know that was a job.
I don't even know if it still is, but I mean, it was kind of like I sat like right outside the locker room, and they come in, they'd pay me, and then I'd have to go in there and clean up. And
Okay,
yeah.
wow.
Hmm.
Yeah, I haven't seen that, so maybe not.
No.
No, I know in South Africa there's those people to let you into public restrooms. So I don't know if
Mm,
that's like, but
oh,
that's not the rec center or something like that. Yeah.
no.
So that's
Hmm.
all I can relate. Okay, and then so how old were you there? Like were you still in high school?
Oh, yeah. I think I
Okay,
was
yeah.
15 or 16, something
Okay.
like that.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Yeah. So
young.
also started very young working and
For
earning some
sure.
money. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I find that is very American. Everyone starts working really young. I started at 14, but I was an exception. So,
Ah,
yeah. Okay. Then from there, from locker room, what happened next?
oh gosh, I'm trying to remember maybe what my next job was. I, I'm gonna jump to because I think throughout high school I did that and babysitting, and that was about it. But in college, I worked. Oh, well, in the summer, let me just tell you, in the summer, there was a summer where I really couldn't find a job anywhere. And it was the summer before I went to college. And I ended up working as a housekeeper in a hotel. So I cleaned hotel rooms.
Mhm.
That was a workout. Like, let me tell you, if you are looking for a physical job, and I didn't have a car, so, and I rode my bike. So I rode my bike 3.5 miles each way, and it was very hilly where I lived.
Mhm.
And then cleaned rooms all day and came back. So I was in really good shape. And
Wow.
oh, and Candace, this is kind of funny. One of my forearms was bigger than the other from vacuuming by the end of the summer because I just used the
Wow.
same arm. I didn't know I should
Yes.
switch.
No, I would never switch. Like,
No.
I wouldn't think of that. But I've never vacuumed that much. So I guess
Yes.
it's a thing.
I think most people probably have. So I did
Mm,
that. And then while I was in college, I worked at McDonald's. So that was probably the next job that I had. And I
okay.
worked there for quite a few years and worked my way up to a position of crew trainer, which is where I
Mm,
got my first really taste of helping somebody else to learn their job. And I thought
mm,
that was pretty cool. And I didn't
mm.
know that that could be really a profession at that point,
Okay.
but I knew that I liked it. So that
Mm,
was the first thing there.
okay. All right.
Mhm.
What did you study at college?
Oh, I studied communication
Hmm.
and business, communication and business, and I had a Spanish minor. So I know I can't, don't ask me to speak Spanish to you now at this point, but
I won't know if you're
I
making it
know
up.
enough that I can understand what's going on.
Okay.
But communication, I chose that major. I literally opened up the course catalog, which at that point was a paper catalog. I think they're
Mm,
all digital now.
mm,
And I went, what can I take as a major that I don't need to take any additional math?
mm.
That
Yeah.
was how I chose it.
That's yes, that's brilliant.
Mm,
Okay, yes. Good choosing, I think. That's math is so hard.
mm.
Yeah, don't know how I'm going to help my kids through school, but
Oh,
let's
goodness.
hope.
It is. Oh, goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you forget everything. So yes, anyway,
Well,
we'll
and
get there. We'll
they,
cross that bridge when it gets there.
yes, and they do things differently now. So
Mhm.
even the way that we learned, at least that was my experience with my kids, the way that we learned math was not the way they were teaching the math. And so I remember going to a fourth grade conference and asking the teacher, can you show me how you teach math so I can help my daughter learn how to do her math at home?
Yes, yes. Okay, I'm going to take that advice.
Yes.
That's awesome. Okay, so
hmm
college, McDonald's, did you leave straight away? Did you study near home or did you leave home at that point?
I was not near home. I was about a 4-hour drive from
Okay.
my home. So enough that I could go home for breaks, but I wasn't
Mhm.
home
Mm.
frequently.
Okay.
And I was in a small town. And then, yeah, at the end of my college career, I really thought I wanted to be an event planner. So
Mhm.
I had done a lot of theater as a younger person, and then I was involved on campus in the campus entertainment and campus events. So bringing the entertainers to campus, the concerts, the comedians. And so I
Mhm.
thought that was kind of what I wanted to do. And so I got an internship at the local arena that brought in different sporting events and also concerts and all of that in their event planning department. And so that was my internship while I was in college. And then when I graduated, I ended up working there for a very short period, but found that that wasn't necessarily where I wanted to be.
Mm. Okay. What did you see some good shows? Were you able to watch the shows?
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, for the most part, I was the one behind the scenes when the people would come in, the personnel of whoever the star was, and they would make sure everything was set up
Mm.
the right way. So they're there, weeks or months before this person
Okay.
comes and making sure we had all of the details. This person
Mm.
needs a room with whatever kind of food they need. Where could we have that? And
Mm-hmm.
different people had different demands that came
Okay.
in. So yeah, I
Right.
did see some shows.
Okay, good. What were some of the odd demands?
Oh goodness. Let's see. There was one group that was a very big name at the time, and they wanted a chiropractor backstage so they could be adjusted between sets. And they
Mm.
also wanted a doctor in the house. And this was fun because we couldn't find anybody who was a doctor who was willing to come for free to this concert and sit backstage in case there was a need for them to do anything. And so nobody knew this at the time, but myself and my boss, but she actually brought in her doctor who was a gynecologist. And this was an all male band. So we had a doctor technically on set. That was the demand, but it was not a doctor that they probably would have chosen on their own. But that person didn't
I
ever need
love
to be
that.
called into action. Yeah, it was pretty funny.
Oh, that is brilliant.
There's some of the
Such a great
stars,
story.
like they don't want you to look at them when you see them in the hall, which is kind of silly, I think. But I don't
Hmm.
know. I kind of grew up thinking people who are bigger stars, they're just like you and I. It's just that they happen to have this job where they are seen by more people than you and I are. But
Mm-hmm.
they're just normal people, right? That's how I
Yeah,
treat it.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I thought some of those demands were a little silly.
Yes, yes. I've heard about like only green M&Ms or crazy
Uh-huh.
stuff like that on the TV,
I
but
don't think I had that ever,
I've never
but
met a celebrity, but I've also never sought them out. So, because I'm not very starstruck. I mean, I appreciate
same.
that they're brilliant.
Same.
Yeah, not very starstruck. So,
Yeah.
well, that sounds like an awesome job. I always feel like I should have done that because I love concerts so much. So, one of my friends worked in Vegas and saw like all the things. So, I was like, man, I missed a trick there in my 20s. Okay, so now from event planner, what happened next? And how did you come to do this work? Because now I can see the seeds are getting planted. How did you
Hmm.
eventually land up here in
Yeah.
L&D?
Well, so after I graduated and I stayed on with that arena for a short period, but I wasn't loving, and maybe because Candace, you and I just said we're not really that starstruck. I didn't really love planning an event just for entertainment. And I kind of knew that, but I also kind of knew I liked this sort of planning an event piece of it because I like the organizing piece. So it was difficult to find a job at the time. It wasn't a time in our economy where there were a lot of jobs. And I signed on with a temp agency. And that temp agency got me a job as a receptionist in HR for a local company. And this was in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I lived in that area at this time. And so I was working in HR, and a couple of my duties were to coordinate and organize all of the training events and the new employee orientations.
Mhm.
And I also did pre-employment testing, administered pre-employment testing, organized resumes. Basically, I was the administrative assistant for the HR department. And
Mhm.
that's when I think I really started to realize there's something to this people development piece. I don't think I called it that at that point. But I loved the part of the job that was really essentially it was planning an event, but it was planning an event for the purposes of helping people to learn or be better at the roles they did. And
Mhm.
so that combined that kind of that ability and love of organization and people, but for a different purpose than just the entertainment world.
Mhm. Okay, I love that. Yes, I'm starting to make my connections here. You study communication, event planning, then you go into the people side. So, yes, I
Hmm.
can see all the dots coming together. Okay, so you were the temp there, and then did you stay on there, or what, how did you
Yep.
grow into this?
Yeah, they hired me as a full-time employee, and then I did work in their HR team for a couple of years after that, and really then moved out of the reception role into a more dedicated training coordinator I at the time, I don't think it was called instructional design. I don't even think that field really existed yet, but I started to help create some of the training. And I'll be honest, Candace, I didn't know what I was doing at that point. I mean, I didn't know that this could be a career. I just I knew kind of what people I paid attention to when I was doing the new employee orientations, what people what people were interested in.
Mm.
That company sent me to a creative training techniques conference and when I was in that training coordinator role. And that was by Bob Pike, who's still around and his company's still around today. But his whole concept and this conference, which happened to be in the same city where I was in Minneapolis, and it was just down the street from where I worked. And so I don't know if that's why they chose it, but I was sent to it and it really changed my view because that conference was all about let's get creative in how we're training people. Let's not just sit them in front of somebody and lecture at them. That doesn't work. And so that was the first time I was kind of exposed to this. Oh, wait a minute. We could do things differently and it'd be more effective and it'd be more impactful and people would get more out of it. And so that started my wheels turning. So that was when I was in that training coordinator role that they sent me to
Mm.
that.
Oh, I love that. Okay.
Hmm.
I also just want to circle back when you said I paid attention to
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
Such a I don't know, lost art or undervalued side of getting this right. Is just listening to the people, knowing the questions they're asking, So how did that help you?
Yeah. I think people who are in learning and development and who work their way to becoming good facilitators, they do pay attention. Like they are good at that because facilitation as an art extends beyond the classroom. Yes, in a classroom, we're paying attention and we want to make sure people are getting the most out of it. And that was always my goal, which is why the creative training techniques thing kind of stuck with me. But also just facilitating a meeting.
Mhm.
Like you can facilitate a meeting or a small group discussion or a book club I mean, it's all really about the questions you ask and how you engage people and how you lead and direct the room. And so I think our best those who are best at it will pay attention because then they know where to lean in and where to step back. And I
Mm.
think I don't know how to tell you how I figured this out, if it was just intuitive or if it came from growing up and being in activities and leading different, you know, student groups or whatnot, but and caring about people. I think that has always driven me is I'm very interested in people and that probably, honestly, Candace, now that we're talking about this, and I'm thinking with my mouth right now, when you're the oldest of 10 children and they're all very different. And I had a mother who really over and over again, and I've told her this now that she's older and I'm older, she stressed, we are all different, but there's sort of beauty in the differences. And so if we can figure out what really engages people or supercharges people or what their motivations are, what they're good at and capitalize on that, like our society will be so great.
Mm.
She always used to, one of my favorite sayings she said is somebody's got to flip the burgers. They might as well like it. So if if we can figure out what people are good at. And so I think that was part of my motivation too, was I'm just fascinated by all of the differences in people and how do we capitalize on those and help make people better.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know that that answered your original question. I feel like I got a little rambly, but
Oh no, I was actually thinking along those lines because I was like, being in such a big family, you need to be so aware. Just
Mhm.
room dynamics will shift when that sibling comes in. And, I think you just were probably hyper aware of the differences and how to, I don't know, read a room and, being the eldest as well. Yeah, so I was going to
Yeah.
ask you along those lines, and then you went
Aware
back.
and accepting. Like not everybody has to be the same as me, and that's okay.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that maybe is part of it too. And then having a mother who she really stressed, let's figure out what's good about everyone and let's lean into that. And yeah, you aren't the same as your sister, and that's okay. But here's what your sister's good at.
Mhm.
So we had those conversations regularly, and that was just partly who my mom was. She would probably love the seat you're sitting in, Candace, because she really is the person who's always interested in how people got to where they are in their career. I
Mhm.
think had she not had that many children and had she gone back and worked, she would have been the person that had figured out how to help people find and have fantastic careers. She's the one who like she goes to the hairdresser and she comes back and she has the whole story of how that person became a hairdresser because that's what she asks them.
Yeah.
So I think part of it is just this is the person I grew up. You know, you kind
Mhm.
of admire your
Yeah.
mother to a certain extent. This is the person I
Mhm.
grew up kind of admiring and thinking this is how you operate in the world as an adult until I got old enough to figure it out myself. So
Mm.
that
Oh,
was part of it too.
that's absolutely lovely. I love looking at the best and how everyone deserves to be happy, like to do something that actually fuels them. So yeah, I love that. Okay. So we'll get to your current role and business, but let's go back. If you look through your career, what were some or one of the most challenging things that happened to you? And then we'll do part two, which will be how did you get over that? But let's just focus on a challenge that.
Yeah, I think one was definitely this idea of how do I work as a professional and also be a mom? So when I used to think when I was younger that I had to choose. I could have a career or have a family, and I couldn't do both. And I think that again comes from my mother never worked. But I knew I wanted to work. And so I didn't really know how that was going to happen, but I worked for almost 10 years at a small liberal arts college. It actually happened to be the one that was my alma mater, but I left and then came back to work there. And I did developed an entire student leadership development program while I was there. Um, and that was the time when my kids were young. And when you work at a college and you're doing student leadership development, you have to be available to do that work when the students are available, which means nights and weekends quite often. And so I was working many, many, many hours. And thankfully, I have a partner who is very supportive. But what I had to learn to do was balance my time. I had to learn that there's a no inside every yes. So every time you say yes to something, you're always saying no to something else. And so if I took on too much, what fell behind, the no became the time with my family or my health, my sleep, all those things. And so I had to learn how do I balance? And I did things very intentionally, like within that job, what control do I have over my schedule? Well, I made sure that I never worked 2 nights in a row. So I always was home one, and then maybe I'd be gone the next. Um, I negotiated with my boss eventually to have a few hours off on Fridays to be home with my son after school. So there were things that I did in order to try to balance, but that was definitely a very challenging time. So that was tricky. And then that job ended because I had built this full program. It was a development program. It was co-curricular, but we were starting to integrate it into classrooms. So this was really exciting because I don't know if you've ever had this experience with the group work in the classroom and nobody really knows how to work as a group. And so one person ends up doing all the work. Well, I knew that if we could help our students understand how to work as a group, how to be leaders in a group, that kind of thing, that then they could be more effective in the classroom. And so we had some plans to do that, and we had faculty bought in. And then everything came to a screeching halt. And I was told, you know what, we don't have the budget for any of this. We're going to just need you to maintain everything you've done. And when you're a developer and creator, and that's kind of who you are, and somebody says just maintain it, I see you're nodding, so this is hitting home. It feels like all the air's been sucked out of your lungs, right? So I did sort of go through this time of what do I do now? Because I've loved doing this work and it's not going to continue. And if all they truly need at this point is maintenance, then I'm somebody else would love this job way more than I would, is what I thought. So I had to leave at that point. That was tough too, to figure out. And I think I'm sure you've heard these stories of we all kind of have these ups and downs in our career where we have these moments of reckoning almost where we're like, wait a minute, I had this, it was all planned out. I knew where we were going, and now something's happened and it's knocked me completely off kilter. And I don't even know what to do next. What does this mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I wanted to comment and say, you had a lot of self-awareness to know that that is what took the air out of your lungs. So I think that's really good in a way because a lot of people just feel disgruntled and why am I here and I just don't like being here and I'm angry, but they can't understand why. And so that's really good, yeah, self-awareness that you knew it's because of this maintenance part and I'm a creative person. That took me years to understand.
Mm.
Like, and that's why I'm saying yes, because it took me so long and now I understand that, if something's not changing and evolving, I get super bored. But that like years took me years to even understand. I didn't know I was a creative person. Like which, so that's awesome. How did you like at the time, was it so crystal clear or has it been in hindsight that you knew it was because the creative side got taken away and you just had to maintain this piece of work that was what it was?
It was pretty clear to me.
Okay.
Um, I mean, I really think I can remember sitting in my boss's office and her telling me those words, and I literally felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. Like,
Mm,
I
mm,
don't think I can do that. That's no, I don't, I didn't, I think because too, I had such a plan and a strategy for how to integrate it throughout the curriculum, throughout the campus. We had been building, I'd built several partners within the faculty who were willing to give
mm,
pieces a
mm,
try. Like it was going to be, I thought, very impactful for our students to be able to have more of these skills that were sort of the outside the classroom skills that every employer is looking for. You know, the ability to communicate, the ability to work with others, the ability to collaborate, work in a group, all of those kinds of things that we could help college students learn those before they launched. And we had alumni who had come back and said they'd gone through the program and they ended up talking about it, the leadership development program we had done. They talked about that more in their interview than anything else. Like, yes, they had the degree,
mm,
but the reason that the employers were interested in hiring them was because they knew how to communicate with people from different backgrounds, as opposed to, or in addition to, like that's what set them apart. And so I knew there was a lot, there were things there that we could have really capitalized on, and I was really excited about it.
mm.
So I think to be told, nope, you can't pursue that anymore, it was a little bit of a shock in that moment.
Okay.
So then I don't know if you do this, Candace, but every year for many, many years, I've come up with one word that kind of has driven me for the next year. And so I decided that year my word was going to be curiosity.
Mm,
And so I started to just explore what else was out there and ask tons of people tons of questions. And I started learning a lot more about really the corporate learning and development space, which I had kind of been in before. And then I'd gone to higher ed, but now I wanted to go back. And I started learning more of that, started getting interested and involved in Association for Talent Development, ATD, and a number of different things in that regard. And so I just started asking questions and trying to figure out where my next place would be that I would land.
mhm, mhm. Okay. So did you take a break from work then?
No.
No. Okay.
So what I ended up doing, which actually ended up being very difficult, and I didn't stay there very long, was I did end up working for a local church that I had been involved in,
Mm,
and they hired me to be their director of leadership and volunteer development. Um, and I did that for about 2 years, but it wasn't a good fit. What they needed and what they hired me to do weren't the same thing. So they
mm,
really needed somebody to fill volunteer slots in the nursery on Sundays during church. And
okay.
that wasn't necessarily, they needed a volunteer coordinator. They didn't
Mm,
need,
mm,
they said they wanted somebody to work with their staff and develop leadership capability within their staff, but also within their volunteers so they could have volunteer leaders of other volunteers. And it sounded all very exciting to me. I'd been volunteering there for many years as a volunteer myself, but it wasn't a good fit.
mm,
And then I did what I think is a smart thing for anyone in their career. Oftentimes we don't want to do it, but what I did was I took what I felt like was a step backwards. So I
mhm,
went from being a director. I'd been a assistant director at the college to a director to now I went to a corporate training position as a trainer.
Okay. Okay.
And I took it because I wanted to get back into corporate. The company seemed awesome. The boss who I had talked to in the interview seemed great. So I was boss shopping. I wasn't
Mm,
just
mm,
position shopping. And I knew that I could make an impact fairly quickly in that role. So they hired me. I was probably overqualified, but it was a very quickly growing company. And so within 6 months, I was promoted to leadership development. Another, I think, year, I was promoted to manage a team. And within 2 years, then I became a vice president.
mm,
So that jump backwards was actually the best thing that I could have done.
mm, mm. Okay. And that's, I would love to know how you stay so convicted throughout, it feels like your conviction in your choices, in your decisions, even if they are hard, you make them anyway and you make that leap. How
Yeah.
would you help someone? Ego often gets in the way, and you don't want to take a step back because
Oh,
we
for
worked
sure.
so hard to get to where we were, and now we have to take a step back. Like, and I've done that. I've taken a internal demotion
Uh-huh.
to get back to where I wanted to be.
Mm-hmm.
But that was hard. Like,
Mm-hmm.
just saying my job title felt like a slap in the face.
Right?
I did it for me, but it was so hard. So how do how would you tell people that sometimes that step backwards might be exactly what you need? How would they know?
Yeah, I don't know if I know how they would know, but I think that any any position that we're in, we have an opportunity to make a difference. And so you make a difference maybe in a different way. So I could make a difference in a different way as a corporate trainer because in that role there really wasn't much of a foundation of training and I knew they needed me to build it and I thought this is a great opportunity to infuse some additional creative training techniques to get the things that I had been doing in my work up until this point to and so I knew that I could make an impact and that was what was most important to me. The title was nice, but even when I look back now, I don't think I would have been ready to take on a director role from a nonprofit higher ed world right into a corporate world because it's a little bit different just functioning within that. And so taking that role as a corporate trainer allowed me to really lean into what my expertise was already. Like I didn't have to learn a ton to get up and running in that role. And then it also allowed me to learn and navigate the politics of the organization, learn more about the company and the business and how it functioned. Like I had a little bit more grace to do that in that moment before I took on leadership and the pressure was there, if you will.
Mm,
And
mm,
so I think you can capitalize on any opportunity you have if you look at it that way.
yeah.
I've talked to quite a few L&D people in the past couple of years who are searching for that next role and the L&D roles are kind of few and far between right now. At least that's maybe that's just the people that show up in my inbox, but I've had a lot of conversations with people like that and I think sometimes you do have to take a step back, but L&D people or learning and development, talent development people kind of always find their way back
Mhm,
because you're always going to be infusing that expertise that you have in any role you take. So
mm,
let's say you'd have to step back and take a customer service role even you're going to kind of naturally become the person who's helping to train others and help them learn the role. And you'll be able to do more of that. And you might even learn something along the way that helps you to be a better learning and development or talent development person later on. And
mhm,
so I think the key is just in how do you capitalize on whatever opportunity you'd have, utilizing the skill set you have and making an impact in the way that you can in the seat that you're sitting in.
mm, mm. Yeah, I love that. That's awesome. Very good advice because and it feels like you were where you needed to be. So even though you felt it was a step backwards, just you needed to be there because you needed that space, and then you were able to shine quickly and show your value and all of that stuff. So yeah, that's great. So let me ask you something now outside of your career, just based on your opinion and your observations. What is something that people are not speaking enough about now? And in terms of career, it doesn't have to be L&D specific, just in terms of having a career, building your career, enjoying it. What is something that you think people need to talk more about?
Um, I mean, I think in terms of career, and let me say that this is coming from the standpoint too of someone who has children in their 20s who are just starting on this journey and starting to figure out, trying to figure out what does this even mean? What does a career look like? I think it's kind of what I talked about, like how do you capitalize on the opportunities that are within every role you have? How do you lean into the parts that you like most, even if the job itself doesn't meet your idea of what title or salary you should be taking on? And that it's a tricky thing to talk about because you don't want, I'm sure you don't want companies to feel like they can pay people less. Nobody wants that. But at the same time, nobody starts at the top either.
Mhm,
And so, I mean, I started as a receptionist somewhere and had many, many years of before I even felt like I was really using my brain in the
mhm,
job that I had
mhm,
after college. And I think that's not always a bad thing. If you lean into the parts you like most and
mhm,
take advantage of the opportunities, even if that salary or title isn't what you expected it to be,
mhm,
that could be something maybe we should talk about a little bit more, I think, is just start somewhere.
mhm,
I mean, I didn't want to start as a receptionist after getting a college degree. That
mhm,
wasn't like a, oh boy, I can't, hope I can. But that gave me the opportunity to start doing some of these other things in
mhm.
just little tiny snippets, like leading an orientation and then coordinating other trainings and then taking a job as a coordinator, a training coordinator and going to a conference and starting to learn that journey of maybe we can do things differently and it'll be more impactful. I mean, all of those things were really important and I wouldn't have had them had I thought that I needed to start or not taken that opportunity to start in maybe a quote lower position, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, I so agree with you there. I did a 4-year degree and I started off as a learning and development administrator. So literally printing out the books and
Yeah.
booking people on the system. And then at one day I had to count the stationery and I was sitting on the floor counting the pencils, thinking, I have a degree. Why am I counting the pencils? But yeah, every single thing leads you to where you need to be because I
Hmm.
then became the manager of the learning and development administrators because I knew I was the best person that knew intimately their jobs, their day to day, which so just everything builds on each other. And I think, yeah, that's such powerful advice that, everything, if you're taking what you can from it and adding value, like it's all gonna add
Hmm.
up and be
Hmm.
what you need it to be.
And that work still needs to get done. You know,
Mhm,
you and I have both been in leadership roles before, and it doesn't matter. I mean, maybe nobody wants to count the stationery and the pens, but we have to do it. So if I have somebody who's going to do that with a positive attitude and who's going to add value to it or make it fun or however they're going to do it, we
mhm,
always used to do that, Candace, when I did that role. I would call a party and order pizza or chocolate, and then we'd all count together and make it more of a like what. How can you add some value to it? But those things still need to get done. And then when you're the leader of that team, you realize that still needs to get done,
mhm,
even if it's not anybody's favorite thing,
mhm,
right?
mhm. Yes,
So
yes.
it's important to have a
Yeah.
good attitude about it too.
Oh, yes, absolutely. That was the best stationery spreadsheet I've ever seen. So, yeah. Do you have any defining career decision or moment that brought you to where you are today? Or is it just the culmination of little things over time?
So I've had this squeaky voice in my head, I think my entire career, which is there's got to be a better way. And I think when I went to that creative training techniques conference, that was the first time that itch kind of got scratched of, you know what, there is a better way. You can be more creative and you can have a larger impact. And at that point, training was still done mainly in person. So it's changed over the years, right?
Mhm.
When I went to do my master's thesis, the question I asked was, can leadership really be learned in a classroom? And
Mhm.
because I didn't really believe that the best way to learn things were to put people in a classroom and tell them stuff. And I just felt like I was always kind of fighting that idea that, yeah, we can make it creative and engaging, and that can be part of it. But what has become one of my now mantras is nobody walks out of that classroom with a bow on top. They're not, they don't go and have one experience and then now they're, woo, this prolific leader. It's a series of things that happen over time and practice and all of this. And so I think that's really been my driving factor to get to where I am today.
Mhm.
And then when I was in that VP role and realized that, you know, we were really order takers and we weren't helping the company. So we were doing the best, most engaging, fantastic, wonderful, creative trainings that we could because that was, you know, if we're going to do a training, we're going to do it well, right? But it didn't matter how fast, fantastic, and wonderful and well designed the training was if it didn't solve the problem.
Mhm.
And most of those problems, a lot of them would never have been solved by training anyway. So,
Mhm.
what all of a sudden I realized was we're doing this fantastic job, and the finger of blame is still pointing back at us at the end of the day
Mhm.
because the training must not have been good enough because we still have this problem. And so that was what triggered me to say, we have to do something differently. And at the time, there really wasn't much out there on how to work as a strategic business partner or how to do your work as a performance consultant, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
And so I started to study parallel industries. And I know you and I chatted about this briefly before. You know, I looked at marketing and business strategy and project management and stakeholder management and all of these different things to say, how do they do their work effectively? And then began to integrate some of those principles into the work that we did. And we moved the team from a place where we were order takers over several years. We became partners to the business and we were working in a very different way. And at that point, I thought, why doesn't everybody in talent development work like this?
Mhm.
And started asking again more questions like, there's got to be a better way. We found a better way, but why are all these other people stuck back here? And so that really drove me to where I am now and the work that I'm doing today.
Okay. Fantastic. Yeah, that is awesome. And I'm so glad you are here and sharing your brain with the world. Very much needed. So let's loop all the way back. Go back to your early self, your first career self. If you could travel back in time and thank yourself for doing one thing, then what would you thank yourself for?
I would thank myself for having a positive attitude even in places where I wasn't sure if that was where I should be at the moment. Like when I said I took that step backwards. I mean, maybe that isn't wouldn't have been what anybody else would have done in their career, but I had a positive attitude about it. And what that did was it propelled me forward faster than I would have ever been propelled forward in any other circumstance.
Mm.
And so I think that having no matter what situation I was in, having that positive attitude of how can we maximize this and get the most out of it and add the most value and whatever it may be in that moment, that I'm thankful that I've had that throughout my life.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, no, attitude gets you so far. It is so true. So that's a fantastic thing to thank yourself for doing throughout your whole career. I love it. So now let's tell all the people listening where they can get hold of you, what is coming up, how they can work with you, all the good stuff.
Sure. Well, couple places to find me. I do my website is jessalmley.com and or LinkedIn is a great place to connect with me. I'm on there on a regular basis. I have a podcast as well, Candace, as you know. It's called L&D Must Change, and the and is an ampersand. And that is conversations with people in the field who are pushing for shifts or changes in our industry in some way, shape, or form. And there are so many brilliant people in our profession who are doing so many brilliant things and who are calling for change in a lot of different ways. And I really believe that the only way we actually will change is by adding up all those small things together. I mean, that's the only way change really ever happens. So that's that. And then on alternate week, that drops every other week. And on alternate weeks, I drop a newsletter by the same name, which is my voice talking about the things that I believe we need to change within L&D. So that is one way to follow me, follow that, subscribe to that newsletter, listen into the podcast. And then I do have a book coming out.
Hmm.
In September 2nd is the published date. It will be published by ATD Press. It's called L&D Order Taker No More, Become a Strategic Business Partner. And it is I wrote it to be the handbook I never had when I was moving my team in that direction. So it's my story, but I also interviewed dozens of learning leaders across the country to ask them what they've done differently. And if they haven't been able to work differently, why are they stuck? Like what holds them back? And so that's included in the book as well. So that's a few ways to get in touch with me.
That is fantastic. I cannot wait for that book. I am going to be first in line because it sounds fantastic. I love the angle of what is keeping you stuck. I think that is not asked enough. We, a lot of people are stuck. I've also spoken with, in the last 18 months, about 100 L&D people who also feel that they are stuck. They want to do more. They, don't just want to do training and, you know, to dig deeper on why, I think is
Hmm.
critical. So I am really looking forward to that.
Hmm. Yeah, and well, and we could have a whole nother conversation about
Mm.
all of the reasons why, or you could just read the book and it'll be in there. Or pay attention to my posts and whatnot on LinkedIn because I say a lot about that as well. I do
Yes.
think a lot of it's our fault, and I'll just leave it at that.
Ooh, okay, okay. I'm gonna go scroll back on your LinkedIn post and see
We're
what am I.
masters. We're masters at unintentional self-sabotage.
Oh, oh no, yes. Hmm. I can see that. Yes, I will have to have a whole nother conversation.
Hmm.
Well, thank you so much. It's been my absolute privilege having you on today.
Thanks, Candace. It was fun to go back and relive some of those memories that I honestly haven't thought about for quite a long time. So thanks for
Mhm.
asking the great questions and the great conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime. Bye.